This is the secret world of Whitehall. Decisions taken here behind closed doors affect all our daily lives. 3 great offices of state that deal with money, power and crime dominate Whitehall, and they seek jealously to guard their secrets. In this 3-part series, I'll be talking to ministers past and present, and to normally camera-shy Whitehall mandarins, and telling the story of the great offices from the inside. The oldest of the 3 is the Treasury, the Ministry of Tax and Tears, which can trace its roots back to the medieval exchequer. In Whitehall, knowledge is power, and the Treasury likes to think it's the ministry that knows most of all.
Treasury was a brilliant department. It was the best department I ever served in. It's like an Oxbridge College, sort of brilliant minds engaged in open debate and completely detached from the real world.
The Foreign Office is the grandest of the 3 great offices of state. It's accused by its critics of being the Ministry for Foreigners, run by toffs.
We had an awful lot of sporting metaphors when I joined the Foreign Office. We kept straight bats on sticky wickets against pretty fast bowling, and we went home at close of play.
And in tonight's first part, the Home Office, the Ministry of Law and Order, that's long been known as a political graveyard.
Departments can lose their reputation in a moment, and on that day, our reputation was in shreds.
Secretary, you're going to resign.
Good morning, Mr. Clark. Will you still be Home Secretary tonight?
Another one bites the dust, and another one gone, and another one gone. Another one bites the dust, yeah.
The Home Office has long been seen as a glittering political coffin. Many recent Home Secretaries have left it feet first. It's summer 2009, and the Sir Humphrey of the Home Office, its chief civil servant Sir David Normington, is going down to its basement car park to await the arrival of his latest political boss. The new Home Secretary will be taking over from Jackie Smith, who resigned following the scandal over her parliamentary expenses. Her successor will be the 6th new Labour Home Secretary in 12 years.
Welcome, it's really good to see you.
Alan Johnson has just come down by train from his constituency in Hull, where Gordon Brown had promoted him by phone from the Health Ministry to the Home Office.
Yeah, well, strange kind of journey down from Hull.
It's very strange.
When I get to King's Cross, I'm going to be taken into custody for about the next few years. I hope a few years.
The former postman, Alan Johnson, is the 4th Home Secretary in Sir David Normington's 4 years as the Home Office's chief civil servant.
It's not like my usual return.
I suggest we just walk round this corner for a minute. By the way, this is the Home Office and this is the atrium. It's in 3 buildings. This is the central bit, and this is called Peel, after Robert Peel.
Very good.
As he surveys his new domain, Johnson learns that the press pack is waiting outside to talk to him. But first, he wants to consult the Home Office's chief spin doctor, Simon Wren.
They're not expecting me until we've had a chat, are they? Is this Simon?
You're Simon.
Hello, Simon. No, you told me. I've heard about you. Your name goes before
You're not supposed to. You don't have to. They're not expecting you to know anything at the moment, other than obviously what you already know.
What do you think then? Should I do it before or after?
Just go and say something.
Just say something there, yeah.
Very pleased to be here.
Yeah.
Great honour.
It's a lot about Jackie as well.
Yeah.
Gender is protecting the public, being very
you
clear
seen
about what public concerns are. Remember, it's crime, immigration, security.
Yeah. Yeah, and I saw that. Let's do it now and then get them away from this.
So being Home Secretary is a bit of a poison chalice. You must have really wondered whether you wanted to accept this job.
It's not a poison chalice. It's a three-course meal with coffee and dessert. It's great. It's a real honour and a privilege. Some of the greatest politicians of our time, and I'm not including myself in that category, but you know, they've been Home Secretaries, and they've been here because it's it's precisely because there are challenges here. You know, out of a clear blue sky can come all kinds of things. You never know what's going to happen from day to day. I actually find that a challenge, and it's our job to deal with crime and disorder, and I'll be working very hard to ensure that we can really go into the next election, whenever that is, and give the British public a reason to vote Labour.
Okay, we're going to get him out of here.
Thank you very much.
Alan Johnson is now on the front line in what's traditionally been seen as the most politically hazardous job in government. And he's treading in the footsteps of illustrious predecessors. A century ago, at the famous siege of Sydney Street, London police confronted armed criminals from Eastern Europe. The young Home Secretary, Winston Churchill, arrived to take direct personal command of the operation, having summoned the newsreel cameras to film him in action. The police force had been created in the previous century by one of Churchill's great predecessors as Home Secretary, Sir Robert Peel. Peel's clock still sits behind the desk of the Home Office's top civil servant today.
There is a sense of history in the Home Office, even now, even though we're in a very new and modern building, and because you can trace our core responsibilities for law and order, for keeping the Queen's, or before that, the King's peace, right back through 200 more years to the 1780s.
The Home Office was born out of the barrel of a gun. It was created after troops shot dead nearly 300 people in 1780 in the Gordon riots in London. Two centuries on, keeping the Queen's peace and protecting the public remains the Home Office's top priority. "25 years ago, riots had broken out in Birmingham on the day Douglas Hurd became Conservative Home Secretary.
This is the job in which you get to know your own country most closely. You tend to see the bad bits of it. Run-down housing estates, prisons, riots. Horrors of all kinds. Drabness of all kinds, wickedness of all kinds, comes your way more as Home Secretary than in any other job.
In the Home Office, unlike any other department, you are dealing with the most intractable problems. I mean, dealing with prisons and probation, drugs, immigration, organised crime, antisocial behaviour, you're dealing with terrorism. I mean, it's not a bundle of fun.
Someone's escaped from prison, there's some great police scandal, someone's broken into Buckingham Palace, somebody's been deported and has been instantly shot upon arrival at his home country. All these things, some of them serious, quite tragic cases, suddenly explode in the Home Secretary's area.
There grew up a view that the Home Office was a graveyard for politicians. It was a place you walked through at your peril, being almost certain to lose any reputation that you had.
Okay. Do the honours. This is Natasha, who does security in Paris.
Charlotte. Hello.
Alan Johnson, the latest candidate for the graveyard, meets his private office staff. They're high-flying young civil servants who will brief him about the hazards of the Home Office.
How are you? Good to see you. I'll be reading a lot of your briefing, and you'll be giving a little knowledge where currently there is none whatsoever.
There will be
despite what I said to Sky. Yeah, there will be. Cheers. See you later.
And here's the office. And actually,
well, I came here.
You did, and I think that they have got your stuff here. They've got some of the things on your desk.
For God's sake, look at that.
So I was appointed on the Friday.
Oh, wonderful.
Had some time at the weekend, although not a lot, but sat down with this brief, studiously going through as you would boning up for exams or whatever, you know. And you read every word because you want to kind of absorb as much of it as you can. But when you get to like page 50, you'll put a marker in there and think, I'll come back to this. And then you start the job on the Monday and you never get back to it. Because what happens is you're suddenly in the maelstrom.
You can walk in here and on day one you can be facing a terrorist problem. So you have to be pretty tough.
An attempted car bomb attack which could have caused carnage in London's West End. A Mercedes was loaded with explosives, petrol and nails.
2.5 years ago, an attempted terrorist attack on London came just one day after Britain's first female Home Secretary took office.
I got the job on the Thursday, and very early the next morning, my principal private secretary, who I'd literally only just met the day before, rang me up with a slightly sort of apologetic tone in his voice and said, "We've had a report from the police that there is a car that has been found in Haymarket full of explosives." Had a briefing from somebody who I hadn't met previously but who came in and said, "Home Secretary, what I can say to you is that when you see me, it usually means that something bad is happening."
A deliberate attempt to drive a car into a packed British airport and blow it up.
Glasgow Airport was the scene of the second stage of the coordinated terrorist attack on Britain. It came on Jackie Smith's second full day in office.
I don't think any Home Secretary had quite the baptism of fire she had. And I never left her side during that terrorism threat in London and Glasgow. I remember on one occasion as she and I walked again out of number 10 with the world's press taking our photographs, saying, remember she'd been there about, 24 hours at most, she said, "Is it always like this?"
It often is. The Home Office moved into new purpose-built headquarters in the late 70s. Its brutalist concrete and glass exterior seemed to reflect the distinctive culture that had grown up among its civil servants. Secretive, defensive, and designed to repel borders.
It used to be a real fortress of a department, which resented outsiders and erected fortifications to prevent outsiders knowing what the hell was going on inside the castle. There is a sort of ethos, there is a character about the department where you can still see traces of those fortifications.
It was a very high-powered department. I liked the Home Office, but it was also very traditional. Very slow to move, didn't like having its policies changed by its ministers without a great deal of careful consideration and constraint. It was very hierarchical.
There's always been a hierarchical system in the Home Office, and always will be, I suspect. Even when ministers had meetings with officials, there was always a sort of practice that officials walked into the minister's room in order of seniority. I, when I was Permanent Secretary, was able to push people in ahead of me.
Sir Brian Cubban was the Home Office's top Mandarin for nearly 10 years, in which time he served 4 different Home Secretaries. Over the past 2 centuries, there have been more than 80 Home Secretaries, but only 25 permanent secretaries. Yet it's the Home Secretaries whose photos are placed on the walls of the Home Office by its civil servants.
I have noted the way in which they put the photographs of their Secretary of State in a prominent place around ministers. Now, you know, I've joked with senior civil servants that effectively that is about saying, you know, it's not about celebrating their Secretary of State, it's about saying, look at all of these Home Secretaries that we've got through and we're still here.
Relations between successive Home Secretaries and their permanent officials are key to understanding how the Home Office operates. While some ministers and mandarins have got on well, others have been at daggers drawn over who was really in charge of running the department.
It's extraordinary to think back that, say, in the mid-60s, you could have a position in which the only person pretty well in the whole department who was allowed to put notes to the Home Secretary was one individual, the Permanent Secretary.
In the mid-60s, Sir Charles Cunningham had been Permanent Secretary for nearly a decade when a youthful Roy Jenkins became Home Secretary. The department had the reputation of being a closed society where policies would continue unchanged, whoever was Home Secretary.
It was a sombre department, almost in a sense a dark department. In the Home Secretary's room, there was a little alcove in which there was a board, which everybody awaiting execution was moved up day by day. And of course, the prerogative of mercy rested personally upon the Home Secretary, advised by his officials, and that did have a considerable effect.
Jenkins replaced the board with a drinks fridge and speeded the abolition of hanging. But his plans to modernise the Home Office came up against his permanent secretary. Sir Charles Cunningham's practice was to run the department himself and use the Home Secretary as his rubber stamp.
I was perfectly clear that I had to bust this system. This involved what on the whole was the most wearing hours interview I've ever had in my life when I told Cunningham that the system had to go.
And what was his reaction?
It was not favourable. At one stage in the interview, his eyes filled with tears. And I thought, oh dear, it was the one moment when I almost weakened. Thought I should not reduce this distinguished public servant to a state of such misery towards the end of his career. It was only later I realised that tears were tears of rage and not of sorrow.
I suppose the view is that there is a specific culture and ethos within the Home Office, that whoever's Home Secretary, the department will want to continue with the policy which they think over the years is the right one.
Yes. I mean, there's inevitable inertia in all institutions. One of my tasks as Home Secretary was to one of my tasks as permanent secretary was to explode occasionally and say, doesn't the office realise that there's been a change of government? Doesn't the office realise there's been a change of Home Secretary?
After Charles Clarke became Home Secretary, he was to have a series of clashes with his permanent secretary.
Well, the first thing the then Permanent Secretary, Sir John Geeves, said to me, I thought was disgraceful. He said to me, you've just got to accept this is a job where things come along, and you just have to deal with whatever disasters happen.
Well, knowing Charles, I expect he told me what the nature of the job was first, and of course he'd been a Minister of State at the Home Office.
I said, well, we can't go like that. Whether you're talking about prison breakouts or terrorist attacks or great police issues, whatever it is, these are all predictable. They all have certain, not the exact event itself, but you know something will happen. And so our task is how to prevent those things happening. And then if such things do happen, how do we deal with them well and effectively to protect the public in whatever way?
There are events. You are disturbed by events. It's not a department you can hope to set out a plan on January the 1st about how you're going to spend your time and then stick to it.
I think you never can absolutely sit back in your desk and say, this is all going well. You always have to say to yourself, so far. You always have to touch wood. I learnt in the Home Office to touch wood in a way I never have in any other department.
Along with the unpredictability, one of the Home Office's most difficult tasks is to strike the balance between freedom and order. And that's made all the harder by the constant pressures of public opinion and the media.
No, I've got nothing to say, I'm afraid, at the moment. The Home Office always seemed to be in trouble. Now, I remember my immediate predecessor wrote on one occasion, on a minute, poor old Home Office. We are sometimes right, but we always get the blame.
There was, when I joined, a degree of defensiveness, a sense of being got at, possibly not being understood, that persisted in a number of parts of the office. And when things were going badly, you could see that defensiveness, that sense of being bunkered, of always being attacked, of people not appreciating you were trying to do a good and honest job. You know, on the one hand, immigration control was too feeble. On the other hand, the other side said immigration control was oppressive.
It's a well-known feeling in the Home Office that every man is his own Home Secretary.
You mean every member of the public is his own Home Secretary?
Every member of the public thinks that he knows the right way of dealing with a particular situation of this kind as the man whose responsibility it is to deal with it.
There are those, the hangers and floggers, who think the Home Office is too wet. The readers of The Guardian and New Society who think we're much too strict. And I wouldn't advise a politician who was looking for instant and universal popularity to choose the Home Secretary.
Each of the Home Office's key responsibilities, crime, prisons, terrorism and immigration, have over the years led to bitter behind-the-scenes battles between the permanent officials and their temporary political masters. Problem number one is crime and yobbery with violence.
This particular estate has got problems in relation to youth antisocial behaviour, drug dealing by some of those youths. Dogs are a problem, or can be a problem.
On his second full day as Home Secretary, Alan Johnson is visiting a local council estate in West London.
It's been a perfect first visit. This is actually an estate I was assaulted on when I was 15 years of age. I didn't know till I came here. It's great to be reading lots of briefs and getting lots of stuff from my splendid civil servants, but nothing beats coming out and seeing and hearing it from the front line. My priority is to make people feel safe and secure in their homes and on the streets.
That's the mantra that all new Home Secretaries tend to declaim on coming to office, whatever their political party.
BBC, Mr. Howard, congratulations. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, great responsibilities which we must fulfil. The maintenance of law and order is the government's first duty, and I'm determined to do all I can to ensure that we fulfil it.
In the last 30 years, the balance in our criminal justice system has been tilted too far in favour of the criminal and against the protection of the public. The time has come to put that right.
Michael Howard had come to the Home Office with a hardline agenda to cut crime. But he and his young political advisor, David Cameron, came up against the Home Office's own distinctive view about the problems of crime that officials had developed over the years.
I was shown charts, and they showed crime rising inexorably. And the officials actually said to me, this is the pattern of rising crime. It's gone on with one or two small and inconsequential blips like this for most of this century. It is going to continue to go up. And the first thing, Home Secretary, that you have to understand is that there is nothing you can do about it.
I hate to agree with Michael Howard about this, but he and I shared a view that the Home Office didn't really believe that they could change the world, that they could really make a difference to reducing crime.
Tony Blair's most famous soundbite, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, had helped him come to power. But he and his Chief of Staff soon discovered the Home Office didn't reflect their view that things could only get better.
One of the things that sticks in my mind when we came into office in 1997 was we had a presentation by the Home Office. They came over with slides into the Cabinet room, and they made a presentation with the projected figures for crime, showing them inexorably rising during our years in government. And they said this was a result of the economy improving, and as the economy improved, there'd be more stuff to nick, and therefore there'd be more crime. And we were a bit bemused by this, and we said, well, I said, what would happen if the economy turned down and we suffered a recession rather than a growing economy? And they said, oh, well, crime would go up. There'd be more people to nick things.
So did you get that sense that the kind of mindset of the Home Office was that rising crime was inevitable?
Yes, the Home Office had a clear item of faith, which was that crime would rise inexorably, and there was very little that you could do about it. You had to manage it rather than try to reverse it.
If you're in the Home Office, you do have a sense that you are the Department of Law and Order, the Department of Authority, in an age when authority may not be the most fashionable of the roles to play. And I think what they feel is that when they're faced with the growth in crime, this is the sum total of endless other failings which no one Home Secretary has the capacity, however brilliant and however powerful, to tackle.
Jack Straw was New Labour's first Home Secretary.
What did you discuss with Mr. Blair as your priorities for your new job?
I discussed the job of Home Secretary and the importance of making Britain a safer country, and one where communities and individuals feel a greater sense of responsibility one to the other.
After the mandatory mugshot with the Guardians of Law and Order, the new Home Secretary went straight to the command headquarters of Whitehall's crime-fighting mandarins.
I came across to this building, which was the old Home Office, and it was awful in those days. We used to call it the Lubyanka.
You mean the KGB prison?
Yeah, it was like a sort of prison, and it had little cells off it. And there was a car park, which was windswept and litter strewn. In those days, you could go up the ministerial lift, you had your own loo, and with a bit of luck, you'd never been contaminated by any other form of human life except in a meeting, and then go down the lift and leave.
The Prime Minister wanted his Home Secretary to take a hard line on crime. But Tony Blair came increasingly to feel that Jack Straw had become a convert to the official Home Office view that nothing could be done to stop the rising crime.
I did get irritated with Tony sometimes and used to say to him, I think you're asking me to push water uphill, aren't you?
To counter the Home Office approach, Tony Blair enlisted John Birt, the former BBC Director General, as his blue skies thinker on how to reduce crime. What did you think when Tony Blair appointed John Birt to engage in blue skies thinking about the causes of crime?
Not a lot, in truth, and I groaned. I dutifully cooperated with these blue skies and the thinking. And John Birt began life as an engineer, and he's famous for sort of wiring diagrams, technical drawing, I'm sure he was very good at school. So we had loads of wiring diagrams and end-to-end solutions and stuff.
What about the John Birt report on crime when it reached you?
I'm afraid this is a serious admission, but I remember remarkably little about it, except thinking that we'd study it with great care.
Tony Blair felt that Jack Straw, in his 4 years at the Home Office, had become a prisoner of its defeatist approach to crime. He decided to replace Straw with a tough-minded, populist figure. He chose David Blunkett.
One of the things I was going to do was to hold a truncheon, but I was advised that this was not a good idea.
Blunkett was determined radically to transform the traditional mindset on crime of the Home Office mandarins. But he came up against the new permanent secretary.
David Blunkett wanted to shake up the Home Office. The political agenda, if you like, was to reclaim law and order as a Labour issue and to seize this traditional bit of Tory ground. And it made the Home Office the main political battlefield.
We did have our clashes and frustrations. John needed to establish, as any permanent secretary has to do, that they were defending their new department. To have come in with a Home Secretary with a radical agenda and the intention of driving change at breakneck speed, and to have been presenting himself as a permanent secretary that was going to pull all the roots up and shake everybody up, I think that he felt would have been too much.
Of course, I was also responsive to David's policy agenda, but he should have been looking to me not just to be a supporter, but to be someone who was, telling truth to power.
You described in your diaries one group of Home Office officials as the worst, most obstructive, miserable, disengaged and disinterested group of people I've ever come across.
Yeah, it was probably a bit harsh to some of the officials, but what really got me was that we needed a can-do attitude. We needed people who said, look, these are difficult decisions. You'll not always get it right, Home Secretary. We don't even agree with you. Let's have a good discussion. But just to sit there sullenly around the table thinking, pray God, somebody remove this pestilent beast from our presence, was the sort of feeling that I sometimes had.
Prisons have been the second key responsibility of the Home Office. Over the years, Home Secretaries have fought great battles with their officials over how best to manage prisons.
It's a very dramatic thing to go into one of these huge Victorian prisons in the late afternoon with the sort of darkness gathering about it. They're such a striking part of your job. And therefore, I think almost all Home Secretaries, it's not something you can simply pass by on the other side saying, I'm going to think about this every other Friday. I mean, it is, in a way, the most dramatic part of the job.
Michael Howard was convinced the more criminals who were banged up, the faster crime would come down, and prove the Home Office orthodoxy wrong.
Prison works. We shall build 6 new prisons. And I can tell you one thing. Butlins won't be bidding for the contract.
But the new high-security prison at Whitehall, near Cambridge, did turn out to be something of a holiday camp, apparently run by the prisoners. Although security cameras showed prisoners cutting their way out and escaping over prison walls, the warders didn't notice. They were engrossed in a game of Scrabble.
I was appalled. I was just as appalled as everyone.
Yeah, the picture of the regime that was portrayed at Whitehall seemed to suggest they had lobster takeaways, that the prison officers were more or less the creatures of the prisoners, and people were very surprised that anyone would want to break out of a prison like this.
Well, it was appalling. It was appalling, and I was absolutely horrified.
But a few months later came another great escape, this time from the maximum security Parkhurst jail. 3 extremely dangerous life prisoners let themselves out of 5 sets of doors with a master key. They then scaled the walls using rope ladders they'd made in the prison workshop.
I was then pretty angry because after the Whitehall escape, I had been given assurance after assurance that measures were in place, that nothing like that could ever happen again, that everybody was now fully seized of the importance of security, that all the procedures were being followed, that everything was in place. And so when that happened, I was pretty angry.
Michael Howard sought to pin responsibility for the escapes on his officials.
Mr. Howard, there's a call for your resignation.
Prisons had done for a number of Home Secretaries. It did for Michael Howard's reputation. And so I put a lot of effort into the management of the prison service. And I did say to everybody, look, including the prison officers, I said, I don't mind what happens, but could you please not allow a Category A prisoner to escape? This will be bad for my career and bad for yours. In Charlotte, so far, 12 and a half years on, there has not been a Category A escape. Although no doubt one will happen tomorrow. I've said this.
Go back up the street. It is not safe. Move. Do you know what's happened? Yes, I do. Now move back up the street, out of the way.
Terrorism has been the deadliest of the Home Office's key responsibilities. The threat has grown steadily since the Birmingham pub bombings by the IRA in 1974.
That was a horrible incident. The worst one, which had occurred on the mainland ever, I think. About 21 people were killed, mainly young people, in a pub in the centre of Birmingham. And there was a great sense of horror. And I went to Birmingham the day after, went to the pub and went and saw the victims in hospital, talked to the police and other people and their relatives. I've never felt such an oppressive atmosphere lying anywhere. You can always smell it in the air.
Bring back capital punishment! You're too liberal-minded!
There is a danger of taking decisions, the wrong decisions, under emotional stress of that sort, and under the bombardment of tremendous press publicity. I'm not sure one always gets that right. Better to take decisions when you can, in a calmer atmosphere, but you can't always command that.
I'm sorry. We've got a major incident here. Sorry. Can we move off?
7/7 was the work of homegrown suicide bombers. The perpetrators had evaded the Home Office's counter-terrorism network.
A few minutes ago, I spoke to the Home Secretary, Charles Clarke. I asked him if he'd had any warning of today's attacks.
No, it was completely unanticipated in any form whatsoever.
Does it indicate a failure of intelligence, do you think?
Intelligence is always a matter of trying to establish what we know with limited resources. That is the challenge we face the whole time.
The Home Office's key resource in countering terrorism has its headquarters upriver from Westminster at Thames House. MI5, the security service, answers directly to the Home Secretary. But its critics claim MI5 has over the years acted as a secret state within a state.
I did not, I'm afraid, form a very high regard for how they discharge their duties.
Why did you not have a high regard for how MI5 discharged its duties?
Well, I suppose there was slightly naturally a secretive atmosphere, but this meant that they were secretive vis-à-vis the government as well as vis-à-vis what people who might be the enemies of the state, as it were.
You mean you, as Home Secretary, didn't necessarily know what MI5 was doing?
No, one always had a feeling of a certain lack of frankness. I also think that living one's life in this sort of spy-bound world gives people a slightly distorted view of things. If you're not careful, you'll get into a sort of Alice in Wonderland world in which truth is falsehood and falsehood is truth, and nothing is in real contact with reality.
The man who headed MI5 during Jack Straw's whole time as Home Secretary was Stephen Lander.
You want to sit there?
Lander also served under David Blunkett.
Well, Stephen is what's known as a spook. Spooks are spooks. They're in a world which is very different. The security services do a phenomenal job, much better than I'd ever envisaged when I came into office. But it is a world apart by its very nature.
Because you said at one stage that Stephen Lander spoke in riddles.
He put things in the kind of terms that you get in John le Carré novels, really. And I was reading one or two of them at the time, so I did notice the particular nuances. You always, as with all these spooks, have to know how to read the print that's disappeared between the lines.
The most secret documents in the Home Secretary's office are the requests from MI5 for authorization to bug and spy on suspects. But how much do Home Secretaries really know about what MI5 is up to in their name? Merlin Rees was Labour Home Secretary in the late 70s, and I talked to him shortly before he died 4 years ago.
I just wonder whether you feel that you knew what MI5 was up to.
No.
When you didn't?
No, and neither does any Home Secretary.
Well, by definition, you don't know what everyone is doing every minute of the day. So you need to know what you need to know. I did not feel ever let down on that.
I think I knew what I needed to know.
The late Merlin Rees, when I interviewed him, said that he didn't know what MI5 was up to, and no Home Secretary can.
Yes, and that was a different time. And the striking thing at the time when Merlin Rees was Home Secretary between 1976 and 1979 was that there was no statutory base whatsoever for either security service or for the powers that it was using. Absolutely extraordinary. It's all done on a royal warrant or a royal charter which had never been published. So it's unsurprising that, as I know for certain, the security service were tapping people's telephones in circumstances where you'd never get an authorization today.
You may say I'm deluded or deluding myself, but I certainly never felt and don't now feel that there was a process going on to pull the wool over my eyes in any respect. But as I say, you may say naive fool, but the conspiracy theorists are all out there in various ways, but I certainly felt MI5 and its leadership was absolutely ready to help and respond in any way.
Of all the battlegrounds between ministers and mandarins, immigration is the one that has proved politically fatal. The growth of immigration, both legal and illegal, has starkly revealed the inadequacies of the Home Office bureaucracy. Asylum claims swamped the department's old-fashioned systems, and massive backlogs built up. When Jack Straw came to office, his officials assured him that the system was being radically modernised.
The Home Office said we've established this new all-singing, all-dancing IT system for processing asylum claims. and it would be fully working by November 1998. Anyway, come November 1998, far from being fully working, this system had completely collapsed, and with it the whole of the asylum system. And we had 100,000 cases piled up in manual files that were supposed to have been disposed of, and everything was supposed to have been scanned in, and it was one of the many things that happened to me. The same secretary, it nearly wrecked my career. But I kept saying to them, this was your idea.
Good evening. More illegal immigrants are tonight attempting to enter the Channel Tunnel in Calais and make their way to Britain.
The spiralling growth of illegal immigration became a major political problem for the Home Office and for Number 10. Tony Blair and David Blunkett championed high-tech measures to identify bogus asylum seekers. And Blair himself stepped up the pressure on the Home Office by pledging to slash the annual number of asylum claimants coming to Britain.
92,000 roughly the last year for which published figures are available. What would you like to see it reduced to?
I would like to see us reduce it by 30 or 40% in the next few months, and I think by September of this year we should have it halved.
When Blunkett, who hadn't been consulted, heard Blair's pledge to halve the number of asylum claims within months, he was furious.
Firstly, I phoned him and he apologised. Secondly, I said, you can make it an aim, but you can't make it an absolute imperative because there are so many other factors. I can't control the judiciary and their decisions, or the way lawyers were playing the system, appeal after appeal.
With the problems of illegal immigration taking their toll on Blunkett, his private life now became entangled in official business. And as he went into the run-down Home Office in Queen Anne's Gate, he felt that even the building itself was turning against him.
I went in first thing in the morning to the Home Office. The building was creaking, it was beginning to fall apart. A kind of metaphor, really, and I went up to the upstairs toilets and I walked in, and I was very quick on the uptaking, realising there was something amiss here. And I was very glad I did, because I called in one of the private secretaries who declared with an entirely straight face that the sewage system had obviously gone into reverse, and the what's-it was now in the wash basin and the bath area rather than down the toilet. And I thought, well, that just about sums it all up.
Within the past few minutes, the Home Secretary, David Blunkett, has resigned.
The Home Office now moved to glossy new purpose-built headquarters. The hope was that bungling over immigration had been left behind in the old building.
Morning. Is it afternoon? You're quite right. The Home Secretary can't count again.
But as the new Home Secretary sampled the high-tech biometric systems for the new ID card scheme that was touted as a tool for tackling immigration fraud,
Please look into the mirror.
Charles Clark couldn't see what was going to hit him. A huge political row erupted as it became clear that within Clark's sprawling empire, the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. The prison service had released more than 1,000 foreign criminals without the immigration service considering them for deportation, as it should have done.
Tonight they came to Britain, they murdered and raped and robbed, and then the Home Office turned them loose on the streets again. They should have been considered for deportation, instead of which they might be living next door. It happened on his watch. Is it time for Charles Clark to do the decent thing?
Well, it's a sad state of affairs. What happened was there were faxes and communications to the Immigration Service to consider them for deportation, which didn't get responded to, and it wasn't dealt with properly, was essentially what happened.
But how did that happen? Why did that?
Because the communication system between the Immigration Service and the prison service was not as it needed to be. We had this absurd situation that we didn't, for example, keep the data about an individual's nationality when they were in the prison system. So you didn't know who the actual foreign prisoners were because you didn't know what their nationality was. It was one of the ridiculous things of all these different agencies working in different ways. And I made the mistake of relying on Sir John Geeve, who'd given evidence to the Public Accounts Committee on this, and had assured me that he had got the matter in hand in terms of dealing with the immediate situation, which turned out not to be the case.
We've got an arrangement now where the prisons notify the Immigration Service when there is 12 months or so to run on the sentence, so that we can sort out the documentation problems and so on. And the
Why did he say that if he said it was being properly just done and you don't think it...
You'd have to ask him.
Well, obviously, I regretted that that we'd sent some information to the Select Committee, which we then had to revise. And obviously, you know, it'd be good to have dealt with 1,000 cases better over 6 years, actually, before I was there as well as when I was there. You know, but he obviously had doubts about me, and I about him.
You about him? Why?
Well, I'm not going to say any more than that. In fact, I'm scarcely going to say any more. I'm due to be at lunch in Baker Street.
John Geeve left the Home Office, and a new permanent secretary arrived to try and handle a full-blown crisis of confidence.
There wasn't time to sleep, really. It was a constant drama, a constant sense of things coming at you, a constant problem of taking a grip on what the facts were, because there was an insatiable demand for more and more information. And of course, it's the case that when you're dealing with prisoners and people who've been released from prison, that they're not lining up to be counted. They're actually trying to disappear and evade you.
Morning, Home Secretary. How many of the foreign criminals have you found?
This Home Secretary has presided over systemic failure. He's failed to deal with it, and he has misled people about the scale of the problem. Isn't it clear that he cannot give the Home Office the leadership it so badly needs?
It won't surprise me to know I don't agree with that.
What really upset me about that was that administrative problems in the Home Office were impacting directly on the Home Secretary. The worst thing for any civil servant is if the things that you have been doing fail, and that leads to your minister having to carry the can.
I think Tony felt somebody needed to take the fall, and so I took the fall. I regretted it. I didn't, in fact, resign. I think I'm one of the very few people to have left government without writing a letter of resignation. I was dismissed from the post, and I regret it. I think it was the wrong decision.
Blackheads, there goes Charlie now.
Clark's successor, Dr. John Reed, was determined to perform major invasive surgery on the Home Office.
John Reed came in like a whirlwind, and of course he was put here to steady the ship and to take a grip, and he certainly did do that.
When I went in, I talked to all of the directors and the permanent secretary, and I'm putting this crudely, but I more or less said, bring me out all of your problems, all of your skeletons, all of the terrible bodies you've been hiding, because it's obvious there are problems in the department.
What Reed learnt shocked him. He discovered that although the public had been told there were only 20,000 outstanding asylum cases,
Immigration, we've got huge backlogs.
the true number of cases still being dealt with was far higher.
Well, ask the simple question, how many have been started and are not finished? Is it 50,000 still? No more. Is it 100,000? No, slightly more. And eventually, after question, I found out it was 457,000 was sitting here. So what appeared to be a massive reduction was actually just opening a file and adding it here. Now,
so nearly 500,000 unfinished asylum cases.
Yeah, and I put that in the public domain. And if I might introduce myself, John Reed, I've been in post 2 weeks, going on 2 years, it seems.
With his permanent secretary, David Normington, sitting beside him, Dr. Reed gave his diagnosis of the Home Office's ills to a common select committee.
In the wake of the problems of mass migration that we have been facing, our system is not fit for purpose. It is inadequate in terms of its scope. It is inadequate in terms of its information technology, leadership, management, systems and processes.
The analysis he gave to the Select Committee that day, I completely agreed with. I wish he hadn't used the not fit for purpose word, because, of course, that then became the label that attached to the Home Office for the next several years, and to some extent still does. When we run into heavy weather, people always remember that phrase.
And what did it do to morale in this place? Because the reports that I had was that people felt very hurt as a result of him saying that.
Yes, well, morale was low because of what we had been through over several weeks. The previous Home Secretary had lost his job. That was the result of something that we had done wrong. That was not great for morale. We're here to serve our Home Secretaries, not to cause problems for them. And then, of course, later, yes, when John Reid used the not fit for purpose phrase, that affected morale as well. Departments can lose their reputation in a moment, and on that day, our reputation was absolutely in shreds.
With the support of Tony Blair, Reid decided on the biggest shake-up in the Home Office's history. It would no longer be responsible for both crime and punishment. There would now be two ministries on continental lines. Criminal justice, prisons and probation would be handed over to the newly created Ministry of Justice. And the Home Office would now be effectively the Ministry of the Interior, concentrating its efforts and resources on crime, immigration and counter-terrorism.
That change in 2007 was very much driven by John Reid. He and I argued a bit about it in a friendly fashion, but he was very clear that one of the problems we had here was we were not able in the Home Office to give enough attention to tackling counter-terrorism because of all the other things that we were trying to do. And he had a very clear view that we should shed some things. I would have preferred the Home Office to stay as it was. I made my representations at the time. I argued for what I thought ought to happen, and then the decision was taken. And as a civil servant, I have to accept that. Others have to account for the decision that was taken.
I believe very, very strongly that there should be at least one minister at cabinet level, one Secretary of State, who got up every morning and thought, my main task today is the safety and security of the people of this country. And the Home Secretary can now do that.
You were the first Home Secretary with the changes in terms of the Ministry of Justice having been created. Would you have liked to have been Home Secretary with the whole vast rambling Home Office that there was?
No. As John Reid frequently used to say to me when there was some crisis happening at the Home Office, think yourself lucky, Jackie, you might have to go back to the Home Office and try and find places for prisoners this evening.
Jackie Smith was determined to show that the Home Office was transformed.
It's some of the most sensitive information held by the Home Office. Police intelligence on repeat offenders and the personal details of all prisoners in England and Wales have gone missing. The Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, has launched an inquiry after...
Not good news for the attempted shiny new image of the Home Office.
I was furious. You know, I said, first of all, it's undermining my objective to say about you as a department that you are fit for purpose, one. And secondly, it's undermining our ability to be able to deliver the policy objectives that we've got. And incidentally, that was a view shared by the Permanent Secretary as well, who was equally furious. But, you know, I was the public face of the Home Office. I was the one who had to answer about that.
Jackie Smith resigned following her parliamentary expenses scandal. It's a Home Office tradition that they hang their Home Secretary once they leave office. Jackie Smith joins the ranks of those who've served and sometimes failed to come up to the demands, both personal and political, of the most perilous of Whitehall offices. Alan Johnson became the 6th Labour Home Secretary in 12 years.
Thank you very much for joining us. We don't have a lot of traditions in this building, but we've had one or two Home Secretaries here, and it is a bit of a tradition that as they arrive, and we ask them just to say some things to us in this atrium.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Look, the first thing I want to say is how delighted I am to be here. I asked if I could have a quite intimate word with the staff, so this is I mean, all this rubbish you hear about poison chalices, this is the most wonderful chalice I have ever seen, and I couldn't be more delighted to be the new Home Secretary. I am a huge admirer of the British Civil Service, and we can have our internal discussions about what happens, but I'm the public face of this department, and I intend to take the rap when things go wrong, and take all the credit obviously, when things go right. I am a politician after all. Thank you very much.
The Home Office has had 3 different locations in the past half-century, and along the way, it has shed many of its traditional functions. Few of its staff were sad to say goodbye to the brutalist building in Queen Anne's Gate and move to shiny new headquarters. But the splitting of the Home Office and its transformation into a Ministry of Internal Security has led many to wonder whether it can still properly be called a great office of state.
The great thing about the Home Office was it was this enormous collection of very disparate, often, functions, together with a whole series of core criminal justice things. That's not the nature of the Home Office now. It is a less wide-ranging, more narrowly focused place. And therefore, I think, to people of my generation, put it quite simply, it is not the Home Office.
There can still be these incidents that can occur from day to day. You know, there's still a whole series of events that will affect us from day to day. I'm pleased that you're not one department trying to straddle too many areas. But I think actually the nature of this job, the kind of edginess of the Home Office, is what makes it a really satisfying political challenge.
Well, I think it's leaner and it's more manageable, but I don't think it necessarily has the same clout that it had. One of the tasks of the Home Secretary, certainly when I was there, was to ensure that number 10 or number 11 Downing Street, Prime Minister or Treasury, didn't simply push you about, because it's very important in terms of the balance of power in government that the Home Secretary and Foreign Secretary are able to counterbalance the power of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor.
I think the Home Office, because of its traditions, its history, the fact that it is responsible for the basics of the state, law and order, the border, countering terrorism, protecting the public, will always be a very important department. Whether it's a great department of state, I'll leave others to judge.
I mean, do you think it is still one of the great departments of state?
Yeah, well, I would say that now I'm in it, yeah. Well, it better stay one of the great departments of state, because I've just reached it.
In the second part of this series, the Foreign Office. I'll be telling the inside story of its battles with number 10 and between Foreign Office mandarins and ministers.
The Foreign Office regards the arrival of each new minister like an oyster regards the arrival of a grain of sand, the intrusion of an irritant with a very low statistical probability of ever producing the pearl.
Mrs. Thatcher, she didn't like the Foreign Office at all. Famously, she said, we have a Department of Agriculture to look after farmers, we have a Department of Defence to look after the soldiers, and we've got the Foreign Office to look after the foreigners.
That's Palace of Dreams, Part 2 of the Great Offices of State, next time.
And our Corridors of Power season continues here on BBC4 tomorrow at 9 with Getting Our Way. There's a brand new series next this evening here on BBC4 as we take a spectacular journey on the Indian Hill Railway.